Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Boundary Waters, Superior National Forest, Minnesota. 2011. Derek Hayes had learned to ignore the feeling years ago. That cold whisper in his gut when he entered certain places, the wrongness that prickled across his skin like static electricity before a storm. He'd spent 15 years as a ranger in Superior National Forest convincing himself it meant nothing. Low blood sugar, stress, pattern recognition. His rational mind hadn't consciously processed yet anything but what his grandmother had called it during those childhood summers in her kitchen, heavy with the smell of wild rice and sage. The gift. The Boundary Waters country in February 2011 was a study in white silence. 6 million acres of frozen lakes and snow-laden pines, temperature hovering at 12 below zero. The kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals before it left your lungs. Derek stood outside the ranger station in Ely, Minnesota, watching his supervisor Jim Kowalski load emergency supplies into the ski-doo. The morning sun barely cleared the tree line, painting the snow in shades of weak amber. Cody Anderson, 26. Solo winter camping, Jim was saying, his voice muffled by the balaclava covering everything below his eyes. Permit for the Lac La Croix area. Check-in missed by 48 hours. His girlfriend filed the report yesterday. Derek nodded, adjusting the straps on his pack. Garmin GPS Map 64 clipped to his belt. Motorola XPR 755D radio on his chest rig, Benchmade bushcrafter knife on his hip, standard winter SR loadout. But his hands were shaking as he cinched down the buckles, and it wasn't from the cold. "You okay?" Jim asked, pausing mid-motion with a first aid kit. "Fine," Derek said automatically. The lie tasted like copper. He'd felt it the moment Jim mentioned Lac La Croix, that plunge in his stomach like an elevator cable snapping. The certainty flooding through him that something was profoundly, catastrophically wrong in those woods. Not lost hiker wrong. Something else. Good. Weather window's closing tonight. 6 hours max before the next front hits. Jim swung onto the snowmobile. "You're sure you want to take the eastern approach? That adds 2 hours?" Derek was sure. The western route felt worse somehow, like walking into a mouth. "Better visibility from the ridge," he said instead. They separated at the trailhead, Jim taking the main search grid while Derek pushed into the backcountry toward Anderson's last known coordinates. The forest swallowed sound, the only noise the mechanical whine of his snowmobile and the rhythmic crunch of snow under the treads. He'd done this hundreds of times. The Boundary Waters was his territory, every frozen portage and ice-choked stream mapped in his memory. But today the trees felt different, watchful. 3 miles in, Derek killed the engine and continued on snowshoes. Protocol for the final approach. Engine noise could mask calls for help, and the acoustic shadow of the forest meant Anderson might hear him coming long before Derek could hear a response. But that wasn't why Derek's hand hesitated on the ignition. Some instinct he refused to name told him to be quiet, to not announce himself. The temperature was dropping. Derek checked his thermometer. 6 below. That was wrong. It had been warmer at dawn, and the sun, weak as it was, should have brought the temp up, not down. His breath hung in the air longer than it should, ice crystals forming and falling like microscopic snow. He became aware of the silence then. Real silence. No wind through the pines, no distant crow calls, no crack of thermal ice expansion on the lakes. Nothing. His radio crackled. "Hayes, you copy?" Jim's voice was faint, degraded by distance and terrain. "Copy. 3 miles out from PLS. No contact yet. Getting weird readings on the weather sat. Temperature inversion forming faster than predicted. If you don't find signs in 90 minutes, pull back to the rally point." "Understood." Derek released the transmit button. Weird readings. The cold was getting worse with every step, a penetrating chill that his layers couldn't block. It sank into his bones, settled in his chest. And beneath it, that feeling, the one he'd spent 15 years denying, was screaming. He found the first marker 20 minutes later. Not Anderson's campsite, not a trail sign, something else. The trees here grew in a configuration that made Derek stop walking, his snowshoes sinking into powder as he stared. 7 white pines, mature growth, arranged in a perfect circle around a clearing. Natural tree spacing didn't work like that, and the bark on each trunk at exactly shoulder height bore marks. Not animal scratches. Deliberate gouges, symbols that might have been letters in an alphabet Derek didn't recognize. His grandmother's voice, unbidden in his memory. When the trees grow in patterns, child, something old has been sleeping there. Derek circled the clearing, photographing each tree with hands that shook for reasons beyond the cold. The symbols were fresh, bark exposed in pale crescents, sap not yet fully frozen. Days old, maybe a week. He knelt to examine the snow inside the circle. Disturbed. Something large had moved here. The depressions partially filled by wind-driven powder but still visible. Not boot prints, not animal tracks. Something that had dragged itself, leaving gouges too long to be human hands. The wrongness intensified, a physical pressure building in Derek's skull. Tinnitus whined in his ears, a high sustained note that shouldn't exist in this silence, and underneath it so faint he almost convinced himself he imagined it, a sound. Rhythmic, wet, like someone chewing. Derek's training overrode his fear. He activated his radio. "Jim, I've got anomalous markings at," he checked his GPS. "Coordinates 48.1274 north, 91.5832 west. 7 trees in circular formation with fresh carving. Requesting you document and photograph on your grid pass." Static answered him. Derek adjusted the frequency, tried again. Nothing. He checked the battery indicator, full charge. Signal strength showed adequate coverage. The radio simply refused to transmit. He pocketed it and continued north, following the drag marks. Cody Anderson's camp materialized through the pines like something from a fever dream. The tent was there, a high-end 4-season model, still properly staked despite the week it had stood empty. But everything else was wrong. Anderson's gear lay scattered in a radius around the tent. Sleeping bag pulled halfway out and shredded. Down feathers frozen into the snow like dead moths. Cookware overturned, food bags torn open, contents spilled and gnawed. The snow was churned in frantic patterns, and in the center of it all a fire pit. Derek approached slowly, every nerve firing warnings his conscious mind struggled to interpret. The fire pit shouldn't still be visible after a week of snow, but it was. Cleared, maintained, and arranged around it in careful geometric precision were bones. Not human bones. Derek's hindbrain offered that comfort even as his stomach clenched. Deer, maybe. Caribou. The remains of multiple animals, stripped clean and arranged in a pattern that echoed the circle of carved trees. And in the center, driven into the frozen ground like a stake, a piece of paper weighted down with rocks. Derek's hands were steady as he photographed everything, following SAR protocol even as something deeper than training told him to run. He lifted the rocks carefully, preserving the scene, and unfolded the paper. Cody Anderson's handwriting, deteriorating from neat print at the top to manic scrawl at the bottom. Day 6. The hunger is constant now, not normal hunger. Something else. I can hear it calling in a language I shouldn't understand but do. The words are in my head teaching me what I need to do. The others who came before knew. I found their marks. They left instructions. I tried to leave this morning. Couldn't. The forest won't let me go. Every direction leads back here. I'm so hungry. The deer I killed yesterday wasn't enough. Nothing is enough. It's not possession. I'm not losing myself. I'm becoming something more. I can feel my bones changing, lengthening. My temperature is dropping, 95.2 this morning. But I'm not cold. I'm never cold anymore. The text ended mid-sentence. The pen dragged across the page in a violent slash. The date at the top read February 14th, 6 days ago. Derek's breath came faster, vapor clouds forming and dissipating. The temperature had dropped again. Had to be 20 below now, maybe colder. His exposed skin burned, but underneath the physical cold was something worse, a chill that originated from within, spreading through his chest like ice crystallizing in his veins. He'd felt this before once in a cave system in the Quetico. He'd fled that cave after 30 seconds, overcome by a terror so profound he'd fabricated a story about unstable rock rather than admit the truth. Something down there had been fundamentally wrong with reality itself. This was worse. A sound behind him. Derek spun, hand dropping to his knife. Nothing. Just trees and snow, and that horrible waiting silence. But the sound came again, from a different direction now. Branches cracking, not breaking under snow load, deliberate movement, something circling. His radio crackled to life without him touching it. Niba, Niba. A voice, thin as wind, speaking words Derek's conscious mind didn't know, but his hindbrain translated anyway. Sleep. Sleep. He backed toward the tent, eyes scanning the tree line. Movement there. No, just shadows. There again, between those pines. Gone. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system even as his rational mind tried to catalog and explain. Auditory hallucination from extreme cold. Peripheral vision artifacts from stress. The voice on the radio just interference from the temperature inversion. Except he could smell it now. A stench cutting through the frozen air, putrid and sweet like a gut-shot deer left to freeze and thaw through multiple cycles. The smell of wrong meat. Derek entered the tent, needing walls around him even though nylon offered no real protection. Anderson's belongings were still inside. Sleeping pad, personal items, a journal. Derek grabbed the journal with shaking hands and flipped to the last entry. More of the degrading handwriting, some passages in English, others in what looked like phonetic approximations of another language. Ojibwe, maybe. Or Cree, the indigenous languages of the Algonquian peoples who'd first named this region and warned others about what dwelled in its deepest forests. The Wendigo is not a monster. It's a transformation. A sacred horror born from the breaking of the greatest taboo. The first peoples understood. They created the myth to warn us, but also to teach us. In the deepest cold, in the worst starvation, there is a choice. Remain human and die, or become something that survives. Something that hunts, something that feeds. I can hear them now. The others, the ones who chose. They sing in voices like wind through skulls, calling me to join the feast. I'm so hungry I could eat the world. The tent shook. Derek looked up to see the fabric bowing inward, not from wind but from pressure. As if something massive was pressing against it from outside, testing its integrity. The support poles creaked, bending impossibly inward. Derek scrambled backward, knife in hand, watching the tent deform around him like a predator's mouth closing. Then it stopped. The pressure released, the tent snapping back to normal configuration. Derek's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation burning his lungs with air that had gotten colder still. He could see his breath now, not as vapor, but as crystalline clouds. Ice particulates forming and falling. The inside of the tent was below freezing. He had to get out, had to reach Jim, call for backup, evacuate to somewhere with heating and lights and other human beings. Derek grabbed Anderson's journal, stuffed it into his parka, and reached for the tent zipper. A face appeared in the mesh window. Close enough that Derek should have felt breath against the fabric, but there was no condensation. The face was elongated, skeletal, skin pulled tight over bone in a configuration too narrow to be human. The eyes, if they were eyes, glowed with a pale luminescence like foxfire, reflecting no external light source. And the mouth hung open, impossibly wide, lined with teeth that had grown too long, too sharp, pushing through blackened gums. Derek fell backward, a sound escaping his throat that wasn't quite a scream. The face tracked his movement, tilting at an angle no neck should achieve. Then it smiled, the teeth parted and a tongue emerged, gray, writhing far too long, and formed words in a voice like breaking ice. Derek Hayes. His own name in that horrible voice, shaped with anatomical wrongness. Sensitive, aware. You taste like my grandmother did. She could feel us too before the white sickness took her vision. It knew about his grandmother, about the gift he'd denied. Derek's mind fragmented, unable to process. The tent wall to his left bulged again, and this time he saw the outline of a hand. Fingers too long, joints too many, pressing against the fabric like a lover's caress. He's not gone, the thing said, and Derek realized with dawning horror that he was hearing Cody Anderson's voice underneath the wrongness. The man's vocal cords repurposed, twisted, forcing out sounds they were never meant to make. I'm still here, still Cody, just more. The hunger doesn't hurt anymore. I fed last night, brought down a moose without weapons, just these. The hand pressed harder, claws visible through the tent wall. Want to know what marrow tastes like when it's still warm? Derek lunged for the tent exit, bursting through the zipper into the clearing. The cold hit him like a physical blow, so intense his muscles seized. Had to be 40 below now, maybe colder. Impossible. But he was beyond questions of possibility. The thing that had been Cody Anderson stood near the fire pit, barely visible in the failing light. 7 feet tall at least, impossibly thin, covered in what might have been skin or might have been frost-burned flesh, stretched over protruding ribs and elongated spine. Its limbs were wrong, arms reaching past its knees, fingers extending into claws, legs bent backward at joints that shouldn't exist, and it was smiling at him with Anderson's face, stretched and distorted but still recognizable in the architecture of cheekbones and the shape of the jaw. I left the journal for you, it said in that terrible dual voice. Knew you'd come, knew you'd feel it. We can always tell the sensitive ones. You're marked, Derek. Touched by the same hunger that touches us. You just haven't admitted it yet. Derek ran. Pure animal panic overrode 15 years of training, every cell in his body screaming flight. He crashed through the forest, snowshoes tangling in underbrush, branches whipping his face. Behind him came a sound, laughter that became howling, a cry that echoed across the frozen lakes and sent flocks of ravens bursting from distant trees in black clouds. His grandmother's voice again, clear as if she stood beside him. Don't run from what you are, child. That way lies the same hunger that transforms men into wendigos. Accept the gift or it becomes a curse. Derek stopped running, not from courage, but from understanding. The thing was faster than him, could have caught him already. It was hurting him, driving him deeper into the territory where it hunted, where others of its kind waited in the places between trees, singing their songs in Ojibwe that his blood understood even if his mind refused. He turned and stood his ground, knife in hand, knowing how useless it was. The Wendigo emerged from the trees, moving with a gait that shouldn't work. Too fast, joints bending wrong, body segments moving independent of each other like a puppet operated by someone who'd never seen a human walk. There, it said approvingly. That's better. I can smell your fear, but I can also smell your acceptance. You're starting to understand, aren't you? The gift is the curse. The ability to sense us makes you prey and profit both. Cody, Derek forced out through chattering teeth. If you're still in there. I told you, I'm not gone. I'm perfected. It spread its arms wide, and Derek saw the symbols carved into its chest, matching the marks on the trees. The hunger never stops. Even now, fed and strong, I want to tear and consume until nothing remains. But with the hunger comes clarity, purpose. I exist to feed. Simple, pure, no more wondering what I'm meant to do with my life. It stepped closer, and Derek felt something crack in his chest. Not physical, but deeper. The wall he'd built against his sensitivity, against the knowing that sometimes places and people and moments were touched by something beyond rational understanding. The wall came down, and the full weight of what stood before him crashed through. The Wendigo wasn't just Cody Anderson transformed. It was a nexus, a doorway between what was and what could be. Derek could actually see in a way he'd never allowed himself before, the other forms surrounding it. Transparent as northern lights, dozens of them, the Wendigos that had hunted these woods for generations. Each one had been human once. Each had chosen, or been forced, to become something else. And they were all hungry. "You see us now," the thing said softly, and for a moment it sounded almost kind, almost human. "Really see. That's the gift, Derek. That's what your grandmother tried to teach you. The sensitive ones don't just feel the spirits, they see the choices. Remain human, or transcend. Starve, or feed." "I choose human," Derek whispered. But even as he said it, he felt the cold seeping deeper. Felt something in his stomach that might have been hunger or might have been the first whisper of transformation. The Wendigo's smile widened. "Then run, Derek Hayes. Give us the hunt we crave. And when you're exhausted, when the cold has stolen the last of your warmth and you're crawling through snow that never ends, ask yourself, is your pride worth dying for? Or will you do what Cody did, what all of us did, and become what you're meant to be?" Derek ran again, not in panic this time, but with purpose. His radio was dead, his GPS showing impossible coordinates, the numbers cycling through locations hundreds of miles apart. But he didn't need technology. The gift he'd denied all his life became his compass now. He could feel the wrongness behind him, growing stronger as more Wendigos joined the pursuit. And ahead, faint but real, a thin thread of normalcy. The path back to human lands. The forest fought him. Branches grabbed at his clothing. Snowdrifts appeared where none should exist. The temperature continued to plummet until he couldn't feel his extremities. He lost his pack somewhere, then his snowshoes when they tangled in deadfall. His exposed skin went from burning to numb, the first stage of frostbite setting in. But he pushed forward, following that thread of rightness even as the Wendigo's calls surrounded him. Whispers in Ojibwe, promises in Anderson's voice, threats in sounds that predated language. He fell through lake ice he should have detected, soaked himself in water cold enough to kill in minutes, dragged himself out through will alone, his body screaming protests his mind no longer fully processed. The cold was inside him now, had always been inside him. The gift had opened him to it, made him vulnerable in ways normal humans would never be. He could feel the transformation calling, sweet as sleep, promising an end to the suffering. His grandmother stood in front of him then. Impossible, she'd been dead 8 years, flickering like a heat mirage in reverse. Her face was sad, but unsurprised. "Almost time to choose, child," she said. And Derek couldn't tell if he was hallucinating or if the sensitivity that had cursed him was allowing one final vision. The gift doesn't make you special. It makes you tested. Every sensitive one faces this choice eventually. Most make it in metaphor. Addiction, obsession, the hunger for things that destroy. You make it literally. What will you be? Derek opened his mouth to answer and tasted blood. He'd bitten his tongue, or his gums were bleeding from the cold. The copper taste flooded his mouth, and underneath it something else. Hunger. Real hunger. Deeper than anything he'd felt before. His body was consuming itself to generate warmth, burning through reserves that didn't exist. He was dying, had been dying for the past hour, his core temperature dropping past the point where recovery was possible without immediate medical intervention. The Wendigos were close now. He could hear them circling, patient as wolves with injured prey. They knew he was finished, knew the moment of choice had come. Derek Hayes looked up at the stars barely visible through the canopy, cold light from long dead suns, indifferent to his suffering, and made his decision. He thought of his grandmother's kitchen, warm with cooking smells and love. Thought of the summer afternoons when she'd taught him to recognize the signs, the places where the spirit world pressed close to this one. She told him the gift came with responsibility, to see truly, to choose rightly, to remain human even when inhumanity offered escape from pain. "No," he said aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "I choose me." The Wendigo's song rose to a shriek of frustration and rage. Derek closed his eyes and waited for the end, either death or transformation. whichever claimed him first. Light, bright and artificial and beautiful. Jim's voice, distorted and distant, calling his name. Hands grabbing his arms, his torso lifting him, the roar of a snowmobile engine. Derek tried to speak, to warn them about the Wendigos, but his throat wouldn't work. Got you, brother. Jesus Christ, you're hypothermic as hell. Hang on, we're 30 minutes from Ely General. Derek forced his eyes open, saw Jim's face above him, concern etched in every line. Behind Jim, 2 other rangers from the search team, their headlamps cutting through the darkness. No Wendigos, no circling spirits, just forest and snow and humans doing their jobs. Cody, Derek managed to croak. We found his camp, Jim said, adjusting the emergency blanket around Derek's shoulders. Empty. Gear scattered like he bailed in a panic. No sign of him, but we found tracks heading north. Big search operation starting at dawn. Derek wanted to scream that they wouldn't find Anderson, that the man was gone in a way that no search could recover, but his body was shutting down, hypothermia claiming the last of his coherence. He let himself be loaded onto the snowmobile, let the world blur past as they raced toward warmth and safety. At Ely General Hospital, they told him he'd come within 20 minutes of death. Core temperature at 86 degrees, severe frostbite on his extremities requiring skin grafts, acute hypothermia complicated by shock. They asked what happened, and Derek told them a version stripped of everything important. Got turned around, lost his gear, exposure set in. They accepted it because the alternative, that something supernatural had hunted him through the boundary waters, wasn't something that fit in their reality. They never found Cody Anderson. The search lasted 3 weeks before being called off. The official conclusion that he'd succumbed to exposure and scavengers had disturbed the remains. Derek kept Anderson's journal, the one piece of evidence he'd managed to bring out. He read it sometimes when the nightmares got bad, to remind himself that his choice had been real. That somewhere in those woods, Cody Anderson had faced the same decision and chosen differently. The gift didn't leave him. If anything, it grew stronger, refined by the ordeal. Derek could walk through Superior National Forest now and know, truly know, which places were safe and which places harbored older hungers. The sensitivity that had nearly killed him became his compass, guiding him away from the territories where Wendigos hunted, where the boundaries between human and spirit grew thin enough to cross. He never went back to Lac La Croix. Some places, once they marked you, never let go completely. On the coldest February nights when the temperature dropped toward 0 and below, Derek would wake with the taste of copper in his mouth and hear whispers in Ojibwe promising transformation, promising an end to cold and hunger and human weakness. And every time he made the same choice, remained human, remained himself, remained cursed with the gift of seeing, which meant he could never unsee what waited in the spaces between civilization and wild. But at least he remained. The alternative, he knew from the journal and from his own near transformation, was so much worse than death. It was becoming hunger itself, an eternal emptiness that fed and never found satisfaction. Cody Anderson, somewhere in the boundary waters, was still hunting, still feeding, still hoping that the next meal would finally be enough. It never would be. That was the real horror of the Wendigo. Not the transformation, not even the cannibalism, but the knowledge that satisfaction was impossible. The hunger was the point. The hunger was eternal. Derek Hayes, sensitive and cursed and stubbornly human, understood that now, and every night that he chose to remain himself, despite the whispers and the cold and the memory of how easy it would have been to let go, was a small victory. The gift his grandmother had passed to him wasn't sight. It was the strength to see horror truly and still choose humanity. Some gifts, he'd learned, were really just tests in disguise, and the test never ended. It just kept coming back, every cold February night asking the same question in Cody Anderson's voice. What will you be? And Derek's answer, now and always, was the same word he'd gasped into the frozen darkness. No. Jordan Reed spread the 4 topographical maps across the ranger station table, each marked with a red X. 4 disappearances, 4 new moons. 4 GPS tracks that terminated in identical spiral patterns. She'd triple-checked the coordinates. The math was impossible. Dakota Pierce's last known position was somehow simultaneously at 4 different elevations. She pulled her reading glasses down from where they rested in her short dark hair, a habit from her previous life as a cartographic engineer for the USGS. Numbers didn't lie. Terrain didn't rearrange itself. But the Garmin GPS Map 60 CSX data she'd pulled from the previous victim's recovered devices told a story that violated every principle of Euclidean geometry she'd learned at MIT. You're wasting your time with that voodoo bullshit. Jordan didn't look up as Chief Ranger Tom Berkowitz dropped an incident report on her desk. She'd worked under him for 3 years since transferring to Olympic National Park, and his disdain for what he called pattern-seeking behavior was well established. 4 hikers, Jordan said, tapping each map in sequence. September 2006, new moon. March 2007, new moon. October 2007, new moon. And now Dakota Pierce, last radio contact February 7th, 2008, new moon. It's winter. People get lost in winter. Olympic gets 200 inches of rain a year. The Hoh River Trail floods. Visibility drops to nothing. Hypothermia sets in fast. Berkowitz's weathered face showed the kind of certainty that came from 30 years in wilderness management. You're seeing patterns because you want to see patterns. Jordan finally met his eyes. Their GPS tracks form perfect logarithmic spirals. Same angular momentum, same spacing ratio. 1.618, the golden ratio, Tom. That doesn't happen randomly. GPS glitches in heavy canopy. You know that. Not like this. She pulled up the digital overlay she'd created, all 4 tracks superimposed. They're walking the same path, 360 degrees of rotation, increasing radius until transmission stops, always at exactly 2.3 miles from the Hoh River trailhead. That's not a glitch. That's you trying to turn a tragic pattern of poor hiking decisions into a mathematical mystery. Berkowitz grabbed his coffee mug. Dakota Pierce was experienced, I'll give you that. But Olympic isn't Yellowstone. This rainforest has killed better men. Find his body, file the report, and stop trying to make this into something it's not. After he left, Jordan sat in the silence of the ranger station listening to February rain hammer the roof. She'd been hired specifically because of her background. Olympic needed someone who could analyze terrain, create accurate probability maps for search and rescue operations, optimize grid search patterns. Her engineering mind had saved 2 lives in her first year. But this wasn't about probability maps. This was about geometry that shouldn't exist. She pulled out Dakota's personnel file. Age 32, 7 years as a wilderness ranger, degree in forestry from University of Washington. His last assignment had been a wildlife survey along the Hoh River corridor, tracking elk migration patterns. Standard work. Solo operation, checking in every 12 hours via Motorola XPR 6550 handheld. His final transmission had come at 14 to 23 hours, right on schedule. Waypoint 7 complete, heading to waypoint 8, visibility good, no issues. The transmission before that, at 002:30 hours. Something's off with the GPS. Keep getting position errors. Trees don't match my survey maps from last year. Jordan opened her laptop, pulling up the National Park Service's historical survey database. Dakota had worked this exact corridor in January 2007. She loaded his route data from that survey. The sensation that crawled through her stomach wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the specific discomfort of encountering an equation that refused to balance. Dakota's 2007 survey showed standard old-growth Sitka spruce distribution, trees averaging 200-300 years old, spacing consistent with natural competition for light and resources. She overlaid his 2008 GPS waypoints. The trees had moved. Not possible. A 300-year-old Sitka spruce didn't relocate, but according to the data, specimens he'd marked and measured 13 months ago were now showing in different positions, not by inches, by meters. In one case, by over 40 feet. Jordan's hand found her coffee mug, now cold. Her training screamed at her. Equipment failure, user error, data mismatch, coordinate system confusion. She checked every variable. The data was clean. The trees had moved. She was still staring at the impossible overlay when her radio crackled. "Base, this is Rescue 1. We've got something at waypoint 2.3. Jordan grabbed the radio. "This is Base. What have you got, Mike?" Static hissed. Then Mike Sullivan's voice came through, tight with something that might have been confusion. "We found his pack. Bench-made knife laid out on a flat stone, compass next to it. Both pointing due north. Perfect alignment, like someone set them up deliberately. Any sign of Pierce?" "Negative, but Jordan, you need to see this. The trees here." More static. "Not right. They're in a circle. Perfect circle. Maybe 60 feet diameter. Old growth, they shouldn't. This formation isn't natural. I'm on my way. Mark your position and hold there." Jordan grabbed her pack, already loaded with her standard backcountry kit. Garmin GPS, spare batteries, first aid, emergency beacon, water filtration, bivy sack. She added her laptop, portable GPS receiver, and the laminated maps. If the terrain was doing what she thought it was doing, she'd need every navigation tool she had. The Hoh River Trail started in cathedral silence. Old-growth Sitka spruce towered 300 feet overhead, their canopy so dense the February afternoon felt like dusk. Moss hung in curtains from every branch, muffling sound until Jordan's footsteps seemed to come from somewhere else, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. She'd hiked this trail dozens of times. She knew every mile marker, every creek crossing, every nurse log. The forest didn't change. Forests couldn't change. That was the whole point of old growth, stability measured in centuries. At mile 1.8, Jordan stopped. The trail forked ahead of her. Two paths, equally worn, diverging around a massive Sitka spruce. There wasn't supposed to be a fork here. She pulled out her GPS, cross-referenced with her map. According to both, she was still on the main trail. No junction, no split. She looked up from the devices. The fork remained, clear as fresh blazes. Jordan's heartbeat picked up. Not panic, but the accelerated rhythm of encountering a problem that violated known parameters. She took the left path, marking the split point with orange flagging tape. The trail curved smoothly, rejoining what should have been the main route after maybe 200 yards. Her GPS claimed she'd walked in a straight line. She stopped, pulling out her compass. Checked the bearing back to the last confirmed waypoint. The needle spun lazily, settling on northwest. She rotated, checking multiple bearings. The compass worked fine. Magnetic north held stable. But when she looked back the way she'd come, the trail curved away in a direction that didn't match her compass bearing. The forest was rearranging itself around her. Jordan forced herself to breathe slowly, methodically. Apply the scientific method. Observe, hypothesize, test. There was an explanation. There was always an explanation. She marked her current position, took detailed compass bearings to 3 prominent trees, photographed the scene with her Canon PowerShot, and noted everything in her waterproof field book. Then she continued toward Mike's coordinates. The spiral pattern became visible at mile 2.1. The trail didn't just curve, it curved with mathematical precision, the radius increasing at a rate that made her engineering background scream in recognition. She stopped every 50 feet, marking waypoints, photographing, measuring. The spiral was perfect, absolutely perfect. The kind of perfect that didn't occur in nature, only in equations. Base to Rescue 1, I'm approaching your 20. Static answered her. She checked the radio. Full battery. Antenna extended. Olympic's dense canopy could interfere with radio, but not like this. She should be well within range. Rescue 1, do you copy? Nothing but the hiss of dead air. Jordan continued forward, following her GPS to Mike's last transmitted coordinates. The forest pressed closer here, moss-draped branches forming a tunnel of green shadow. Somewhere overhead, a raven called, 3 harsh croaks that echoed strangely, coming from multiple directions at once. She found the perfect circle at exactly 2.3 miles. 60 feet in diameter, just as Mike had described. 12 old-growth Sitka spruce arranged with geometric precision, their trunks forming the perimeter. These trees were ancient, She estimated 400 plus years based on diameter. They would have taken root around 1600, long before European contact, when this land belonged solely to the Quinault and their neighbors. In the center of the circle, Dakota's pack, his bench-made bushcrafter knife, his compass, both pointing true north, aligned perfectly. No sign of Mike Sullivan or his rescue team. Jordan approached slowly, every sense heightened. Her boots crushed ferns that released a smell like copper and soil. The air felt thicker here, pressing against her eardrums with pressure that had nothing to do with altitude. She keyed her radio. "This is Reed to any NPS personnel. Respond." Static, and underneath it, something that might have been breathing. Dakota's pack was arranged too carefully. The knife placement was deliberate. Blade pointing north, handle weighted with a river stone. The compass sat in a small depression in a flat rock, as if someone had carved a space for it specifically. Jordan photographed everything before touching anything. She opened the pack using 2 fingers, minimizing contact. Inside, standard backcountry gear, mostly untouched. Water bottles full, food rations intact. The Motorola radio was missing, but his field notebook was there, the waterproof pages filled with his neat engineering script. The final entry dated February 7th, 11:37 hours. GPS unreliable. Have confirmed position 3 times using compass and landmarks. Either my maps are wrong or the terrain has changed since last year. Trees in different positions. Trail routing doesn't match memory or documentation. Beginning to suspect equipment failure across multiple devices, which seems statistically impossible. Will attempt to triangulate position using... The entry ended mid-sentence. Jordan flipped back through earlier pages. Standard wildlife observations, elk scat analysis, tree measurements. Then, starting January 28th, a week before his disappearance. Note: local indigenous contacts mention Leshy, or similar entity in Slavic settler folklore from early 1900s timber camps. Russian Orthodox community near Hokiam apparently brought traditional beliefs. Forest lord that protects old trees by leading trespassers astray. Interesting parallel to local Quinault beliefs about forest spirits. Several pages later. Met elderly woman Anna Volkov. Claims her grandfather worked these timber claims in 1910s before NPS designation. Says her family never cut within the ring of guardians. When pressed, she described a circle of 12 old trees exactly matching the formation at mile 2.3. Said the trees walk, but only when the moon is dark. The most recent entry before the final day. I've measured the same Sitka spruce specimen 3 times this week. The first measurement matched my 2007 survey. The second measurement showed it 6 feet west of previous position. The third measurement, I must be making errors. Tomorrow I'll use the theodolite from the equipment cache. I need precision instruments to settle this. Jordan sat back on her heels, digital camera forgotten in her hand. Dakota hadn't been losing his mind. He'd been documenting the same geometric impossibility she was seeing. A sound behind her. The soft displacement of air that comes before a footstep. She turned, hand dropping to the canister of bear spray on her belt. The forest had rearranged itself again. The trail she'd followed into the circle was gone. Where there had been an opening between 2 trees, now there was only solid wall of vegetation, as if the path had never existed. The 12-tree circle had become a prison. Jordan's breathing quickened despite her attempts to control it. She pulled out her GPS, watching the coordinates flicker and change even though she stood perfectly still. Latitude, 47.8604 became 47.8611 became 47.8598, cycling through positions that spanned hundreds of yards. The compass in her hand spun slowly, the needle drifting through all directions without settling. She forced herself to think. The scientific method demanded systematic observation. She would document everything, find the pattern, understand the mechanism. There was always a mechanism. Jordan pulled out her laptop, connecting it to her GPS receiver. She began logging position data, 1 reading per second. The coordinates crawled across her screen in sequences that traced spirals and loops, impossible paths for someone standing motionless. A sound drifted through the canopy, something between wind and speech, syllables in a language she didn't recognize. The moss on the surrounding trees rippled as if touched by breeze, but the air was perfectly still. Jordan looked up. The trees were closer. Not by much, maybe 2 feet. But the circle had definitely contracted. She could see where ferns had been crushed under root systems that moments ago had been yards away. Her heart hammered against her ribs now, training abandoned in favor of pure primate fear response. She grabbed Dakota's pack, slinging it alongside her own, and moved toward where the trail had been. Dense undergrowth blocked her path. She pushed through, branches catching at her jacket, moss smearing cold across her face. The forest opened onto trail again after 15 feet of bushwhacking, but it wasn't the same trail. This path curved wrong, the erosion patterns different, the fallen logs in unfamiliar positions. Jordan checked her GPS. It claimed she'd traveled 0.4 miles northeast. She'd walked 15 feet. The systematic approach was failing. Every measurement contradicted the last. The tools she'd trusted for a decade of engineering work had become instruments of gaslighting, showing her a reality that couldn't exist. She started walking, following the trail wherever it led, marking trees with flagging tape every 100 yards. After the 5th marker, she looked back. All 5 pieces of tape were visible simultaneously, arranged in a spiral that corkscrewed through 3-dimensional space in a way that violated basic topology. Jordan stopped marking, stopped measuring, just walked, her engineer's mind fracturing against the impossibility of a forest that rewrote geometry with each step. The light was fading, though her watch showed only 15:30 hours. February sunset shouldn't come until after 5. But the canopy overhead had thickened, branches interlacing in patterns that blocked the sky completely. In the growing darkness, bioluminescent fungi began to glow on dead logs, ghost white and pale green, pulsing with rhythms that almost suggested breathing. A voice called from her left. "Jordan, over here." Mike Sullivan's voice. She turned toward it, relief flooding through her. The forest was empty. "Mike?" She keyed her radio, knowing it was useless. "This way." His voice again from her right now, perfectly reproduced, the exact timbre and accent, but coming from nothing but shadows and moss. Jordan's skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with temperature. The voice was mimicry, predation. Whatever was out here had learned to copy human speech. She kept walking, ignoring the calls that came from all directions now. Mike's voice, Berkowitz's rough baritone, even her own voice calling her name in tones of desperate confusion. The trail opened into a clearing she recognized from her maps. Elk Meadow, a natural opening in the forest where Roosevelt elk gathered in spring. She'd surveyed this area personally, measured the dimensions, photographed the distinctive old Sitka spruce at the northern edge, marked by a lightning strike that had split its crown. The meadow was smaller than she remembered, and the lightning-struck tree was at the southern edge now. Jordan pulled out her field notebook, flipped to her own survey from 2 years ago. She'd drawn a detailed sketch of Elk Meadow, complete with compass bearings to prominent features. She compared the sketch to what she was seeing. Every landmark remained, but rotated 180 degrees. North had become south. The creek that should flow west now ran east. The mountain ridges visible through breaks in the canopy had flipped their orientation. She was looking at Elk Meadow in mirror image. The fear that hit her then was different from the primate fear of being hunted. This was the terror of mathematicians who discover their axioms are false, of physicists watching conservation of energy fail, of engineers whose bridges collapse because gravity has changed direction. This was the fear of minds confronting a reality where the fundamental rules have been revoked. Jordan sat down in wet grass, laptop open on her knees, and did the only thing her fractured rationality could manage. She documented screenshots of GPS errors, photographs of impossible tree positions, compass readings that contradicted each other within seconds. She narrated observations into her digital voice recorder, timestamp precise, description clinical. If she was losing her mind, at least she'd have data. The forest darkened further. Jordan checked her watch. 15:47 hours. She powered up her headlamp. the LED beam cutting through gloom that shouldn't exist in mid-afternoon. In the circle of light, the trees had faces, not carved faces, not pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns in random formations. These were actual faces, bark and moss arranged into features that watched her with what might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. Owl eyes blinked from trunks, mouths opened in silent yawns, revealing hollow cores that went down deep into root systems. Jordan's breathing came faster, shallow, the first hints of hyperventilation. She forced herself to count breaths, trying to slow her hammering heart. A figure stood at the edge of her headlamp beam, tall, 8 feet, maybe 9, humanoid in general structure but composed entirely of forest matter, moss for skin, branches for bones, bark plating like armor. Its eyes were round and yellow, owl eyes that blinked with membrane-covered focus. When it breathed, leaves rustled across a chest cavity that revealed nothing but hollow darkness. The Leshy. Jordan's mind supplied the name from Dakota's journal entries, from fragmentary memories of comparative folklore courses at MIT, from some deep pattern recognition substrate that assembled scattered data into terrible understanding. The entity regarded her with alien patience, its head tilted, bird-like moss-draped branches creaking. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the trees around her, from the earth beneath her, from the air itself. You measure, you mark, you try to make small what is vast. The words weren't English exactly, but she understood them anyway, some meaning transmitted beneath language. Jordan found her voice, surprised it worked. I'm not trying to harm anything. I'm just looking for Dakota Pierce, the one who listened, the one who understood that trees walk, that forest remembers, that old places are sovereign. The Leshy moved closer, each step a rustle of ferns and crack of twigs. He brought no saws. He asked permission. He left offerings. Where is he? Where he chose to be. The forest takes only those who wander without respect, who mark without asking, who measure without understanding what they measure. Those owl eyes focused on her with intensity that made her skull ache. You are like him. You see patterns, but you see them as numbers, not as language. Jordan's laptop showed another spiral of GPS coordinates, the golden ratio manifesting in real-time corruption of space. I don't understand. Old places remember old ways. Before your maps, before your trails, before your named peaks and numbered waypoints. The Leshy's voice carried weight that pressed against her chest. This forest was walking long before humans tried to pin it down with surveyors' stakes. That's impossible. Trees don't move. Geometry doesn't change. Your geometry, your rules. A sound that might have been laughter, or might have been wind through a hollow trunk. The Quinault knew better. The Russian loggers knew better. Even now, the wise ones leave offerings at the 12 guardians. Only the measurers, the namers, the makers of grids. Only they forget that the land is older and greater than their understanding. Jordan's training screamed at her to reject this, to find the rational explanation. But she was surrounded by empirical evidence that reality operated by rules she'd never learned. The scientific method demanded she accept data, even when data contradicted theory. What do you want from me? Nothing, everything, return, stay, the choice is yours. The Leshy gestured with a branch arm at the spiral path visible in her GPS tracks. Those who fight the pattern, who try to force straight lines through living geometry, they walk until they cannot find their way out. Those who accept, who follow the curve, who understand they are guests in an old place, sometimes the forest releases them. And Dakota? Ask him yourself. The Leshy stepped aside, and Jordan saw another figure standing in the darkness beyond her headlamp's reach. Human-sized, human-shaped, wearing familiar NPS uniform. Dakota? Her voice cracked. The figure moved into the light. Dakota Pierce looked exactly as his personnel photo, except for the eyes. His eyes had the same round yellow glow as the Leshy's, owl bright and alien. He smiled with lips that were just slightly wrong, teeth arranged in patterns that suggested something had learned to approximate human expression without quite mastering it. Jordan. His voice was right. Perfect. Too perfect, like a recording played back. Don't be afraid. What happened to you? I understood. He gestured at the forest around them. I spent a week walking in spirals trying to find my way out. Each time I tried to force a straight line, the forest curved me back. Each time I denied what I was seeing, the evidence became more impossible to ignore. So you just gave up? I let go. Dakota's too perfect smile widened. I stopped trying to make the forest fit my maps. I started trying to fit myself to the forest, and once I did that, everything made sense. Jordan looked at his owl eyes, at the way moss had begun growing at the edges of his uniform collar, at the small mushrooms sprouting from his bootlaces. You're not Dakota anymore. I'm more Dakota than I ever was. I can see the whole pattern now, the way old-growth forests network through mycelium, the way trees communicate through chemical signals, the way geology and biology and consciousness blur together in places that remember. He stepped closer and she smelled soil and rain and something ancient. You can see it too. I know you can. That's why you were hired here. That's why you found the patterns. The forest was calling to someone who could understand. I want to leave. Then leave. Dakota, or what Dakota had become, gestured at the darkness. Follow the spiral out. Stop fighting it. Accept the curve. Or keep trying to walk straight and walk forever. The choice is real. The Leshy's voice surrounded her again. New moon fades. Sun returns. When light comes, the paths resolve. Until then, you spiral or you wander. Both figures stepped back into shadow, leaving Jordan alone in the circle of her headlamp. She looked at her GPS. The coordinates still spiraled, golden ratio still manifesting in the corruption of space. She looked at her compass, needle drifting aimlessly. She looked at her maps, where familiar terrain had become alien geometry. Every tool of rationality had failed her. Every measurement contradicted the last. She could spend the night here, waiting for sunrise as the Leshy suggested, documenting her observations like a good scientist while her sanity eroded. Or she could do what every instinct of survival screamed at her to do. Move, escape, find a way out before the forest claimed her like it had claimed Dakota. Jordan stood, repacked her equipment with shaking hands, and made her choice. She would follow the spiral. Not because she believed in forest spirits or walking trees, but because the data, the empirical, measured, photographed data, showed that straight lines no longer worked here. If space itself was curved, then navigation required accepting the curvature. She set her GPS to track mode and started walking, following the logarithmic spiral that appeared on the screen. Left foot, right foot, curving always inward with increasing radius, the golden ratio made flesh in her footsteps. The forest responded. Trees drew back as she approached, opening paths that closed behind her. The ground became firmer, roots arranging themselves into natural stairs. The oppressive darkness lifted slightly, bioluminescent fungi marking the way like runway lights. She walked for hours or minutes. Time had become as unreliable as space. Her headlamp battery should have died but didn't. Her water bottles should have emptied but remained half full. The spiral tightened, radius decreasing in perfect mathematical progression. At the center, she found the trailhead parking lot. Jordan stumbled out of the forest into weak morning light, legs trembling with exhaustion. Her truck sat exactly where she'd left it, covered in frost. She checked her watch. 0647 hours, February 8th. She'd been in the forest for 16 hours. The ranger station was chaos when she arrived. Search and rescue teams mobilizing, helicopters on standby, Berkowitz coordinating with Olympic National Forest and the Coast Guard for a multi-agency response. He saw her, and his weathered face went slack with relief. Jesus, Reed. We've been trying to raise you all night. Sullivan and his team came back at dusk, said you'd disappeared. We thought... He stopped himself. Where the hell were you? Jordan opened her mouth to explain, to tell him about impossible geometry, about forests that rewrote space, about entities made of moss and ancient memory. But looking at his rational, grounded face, she knew how it would sound. "I got turned around," she said finally. "GPS malfunctioned. Made it out at dawn." "And Pierce?" She thought about Dakota's owl eyes, about the choice he'd made to let go of human geometry and embrace something older. "I don't think we're going to find him." Berkowitz studied her face, and she saw the moment he decided not to push. "File your report, get some rest. We'll debrief after you've slept." Jordan nodded and walked to her desk. She pulled out her laptop, opened the documentation she'd gathered. Hundreds of GPS logs, photographs, voice recordings. Proof that the Olympic rainforest operated by rules that predated and superseded human understanding of space. Her finger hovered over the delete key. The scientific method demanded she share her findings, publish the data, let other researchers examine the evidence and form conclusions. But she thought about the Leshy's warning, that those who tried to measure and name and control ended up walking forever in spirals. Maybe some patterns weren't meant to be mapped. Jordan deleted the files, all of them. GPS logs, photographs, voice recordings. She wiped her camera's memory card, reformatted her field recorder. In her waterproof notebook, she carefully tore out the pages documenting impossible measurements and fed them to the office shredder. Only Dakota's journal remained. She locked it in her desk drawer, a reminder that some people found patterns the world wasn't ready to acknowledge. That night, she dreamed of walking through spirals of ancient trees, while something with owl eyes watched from the shadows and whispered in languages older than English, older than Russian, older than Kino. Languages made of growth rings and rainfall, and the slow, patient movement of roots through soil. When she woke, there was moss growing on her windowsill, though there hadn't been any the night before. Jordan didn't return to the Ho River corridor. She filed paperwork recommending that section be designated for wildlife preservation, access limited to indigenous cultural observers only. Berkowitz approved it without question. He'd seen the look in her eyes, the kind of look that said some things were better left unmeasured. Sometimes on new moons, she still pulled out her old survey maps and traced the spiral patterns. The golden ratio appearing in GPS corruption, the 12-tree circle that predated national parks by centuries, the perfect logarithmic curve that led either to escape or transformation, depending on whether you fought it or accepted it. Dakota Pierce was officially declared lost, presumed deceased, after 30 days. They held a memorial service. His family came from Seattle, grieving and confused, demanding answers that Jordan couldn't give. She attended the service, said nothing about owl eyes or offers to stay, and went home to find small mushrooms growing in the corners of her apartment, despite the dry heating and urban environment. The forest remembered her. And in remembering, it waited, patient as old growth, inevitable as the golden ratio, ancient as the leshy and the walking trees and all the patterns that existed before humans tried to make them fit neat columns and straight lines. Jordan Reed understood now what Dakota had learned. Some places are sovereign. Some patterns are bigger than the minds that observe them. And some choices once made echo through spirals that have no end and no beginning, only the endless curve of acceptance or the infinite straight line of denial. She'd chosen the curve, and the curve had let her go. But sometimes when February brings new moons, she dreams of old forests where geometry bends and trees remember how to walk, and she wonders if the choice was ever really hers at all. I hope you felt the terror. If you enjoyed this literary horror, please consider following. Which moment scared you the most? What's your theory about Dakota's final choice? Derek Sullivan's daughters needed braces. $6,000 the Park Service salary wouldn't cover, which was why he'd volunteered for the overnight grid search, despite his shift ending 4 hours ago. He almost missed the smell, sulfur and burned sage, acrid enough to cut through the October mountain air of the Great Smoky Mountains. Then he saw Ethan Lawson's campsite, or what remained of it. The tent had been erected at the center of a perfect circle of salt, now broken in 3 places, symbols Derek didn't recognize, angular, precise, deliberate, covered every surface in what looked like dried blood. The nylon fabric, the ground sheet, even the rocks forming the fire ring had been marked with characters that hurt to look at directly, as if they'd been designed to slide away from human perception. And suspended from the ridgeline, still gently rotating in the night breeze, hung Ethan's Benchmade 162 Bushcrafter, the blade driven through a hand-drawn image of a crowned king with a camel's head. Derek's Motorola XPR 7550 crackled with static, then, "All units, we've got a 1079. Missing person just walked into the Cades Cove Visitor Center. Says his name is Ethan Lawson." Derek looked at the tent, at the blood, at the symbol, at the knife-catching moonlight in ways that made his stomach clench. He pulled his service weapon for the first time in 11 years and keyed his radio with a thumb that wanted to shake but couldn't afford to. "Sullivan to IC. I'm at the PLS coordinates. You need to see this. And someone needs to detain that individual at Cades Cove until we confirm ID." The response came from Linda Chen, the incident commander running the search from the ranger station 12 miles away. "Copy that, Sullivan. What have you got?" Derek swept his Streamlight ProTac across the campsite again. 3 black candles formed a triangle around the tent, their wax pooled in patterns that looked intentional. A leather-bound book lay open near the cold fire pit, its pages covered in Latin text and hand-copied diagrams. He'd taken 2 semesters of Latin for his forestry degree, enough to recognize Lemigitan and Clavicula Salomonis, even if he couldn't translate the dense paragraphs between the illustrations. "I see, I've got what looks like some kind of ritual site. Occult imagery, foreign language text, possible biohazard materials, requesting CSI and..." He paused, aware of how the next words would sound. "And I don't think we should be out here alone." Silence on the radio. Then, "Sullivan, are you saying you found evidence of criminal activity?" "I'm saying I found a crime scene that someone went to a lot of trouble to set up. And our missing person just walked out of the woods right when we found it. That's not coincidence." "Okay, stay put. I'm sending Reynolds and Martinez your way. ETA 40 minutes. Do not touch anything." Derek killed his flashlight and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. The October sky hung heavy with clouds that obscured the moon. He knew from the park's astronomical calendar that tonight was the new moon, the darkest night of the lunar cycle. Around him, the forest had gone silent in the way that always preceded trouble. No owls, no rustling, not even the distant yips of coyotes that usually echoed through these mountains. He'd worked Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 11 years, ever since Emily had gotten pregnant with their first daughter, and he'd needed the federal benefits. The pay was garbage, $43,000 a year to cover 522 and 419 acres of wilderness. But the insurance was solid and the retirement vesting would kick in at 15 years. Just 4 more years. 4 more years of telling Emily they couldn't afford family vacations, of watching his daughters wear hand-me-down clothes, of seeing that tightness around her mouth when the bills came due. The orthodontist had quoted $6,000. His credit cards were maxed. The Park Service didn't give overtime. Derek forced his attention back to the campsite. The broken salt circle bothered him most. It looked deliberate, as if someone, or something, had stepped through it from the inside. The symbols drawn in blood seemed to pulse in his peripheral vision, though when he looked directly at them, they were just dried brown stains on yellow nylon. His radio squelched. "Sullivan Chen, update on your 1079. Individual claiming to be Ethan Lawson has confirmed ID via driver's license. Photo matches our missing person report. But there's something weird." "Weird how?" "He's clean. I mean spotless. No dirt, no scratches. Clothes look like they just came out of the dryer. Says he woke up at the visitor center about 20 minutes ago with no memory of the past 3 days. Medical's checking him now, but he seems physically fine. Almost too fine." Derek's grip tightened on his Glock 22. "Chen, I need you to keep him there. Don't let him leave and don't let him make any phone calls." "On what grounds? He's not under arrest." "Then make something up, please." Derek looked at the book again, at an illustration showing a triangle with a circle at each point, symbols written in the spaces between. I think whatever happened here isn't finished. Another pause. Then, copy. I'll stall him. But Sullivan, you need to give me something concrete. Park brass is already breathing down my neck about resource allocation on this search. If you're seeing things that aren't, I'm not seeing things. I'm seeing evidence of a crime that involves blood, potential kidnapping, and ritualistic behavior. That concrete enough? Fair point. Chen out. Derek crouched near the fire pit, careful not to disturb anything. The leather book was handmade, its pages thick parchment covered in cramped handwriting that looked old. Not ancient, but deliberately archaic. Next to the illustration of the triangle and circles, someone had written in English, "Third night of the moon's darkness, Crown Prince of the West, he who teaches all sciences and secret things." Below that, a list of materials: sulfur, sage, myrrh, dragon's blood resin, 3 black candles, salt for the circle, and at the bottom, underlined 3 times, "Sacrifice must be willing. Sacrifice must speak the name." Derek's Motorola crackled again, but this time it was just static, a long, warbling interference that made his fillings ache. Then a voice, distant and distorted. Derek Sullivan, father of 2, debtor, desperate. He jerked upright, weapon raised, sweeping the darkness. "Who's there? Identify yourself." The static resolved into Linda Chen's voice. "You copy? Sullivan, do you copy? I'm here. Did you just say my name?" "Negative. I was asking for your status. You okay out there?" Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. "Yeah, fine. Just thought I heard something." He was losing it. 18 hours into his shift, running on gas station coffee and adrenaline, seeing occult symbols and hearing voices. Emily would kill him if she knew he'd volunteered for overtime again, especially after promising to be home for Megan's soccer game tomorrow afternoon. 8 years old and already disappointed in her dad. The wind picked up, carrying that smell again. Sulfur and sage and something underneath that reminded Derek of the rendering plant that used to operate near his hometown. Meat and decay and chemical sweetness. The tent flap, which had been zipped closed, now hung open. Derek hadn't seen it open. He'd been watching the tent the whole time. He approached slowly, streamlight mounted under his Glock's barrel. Standard training. Don't get tunnel vision. Maintain situational awareness. Always have an exit strategy. The tent was a 2-person REI quarter dome, maybe 5 years old, well maintained. No rips, no damage except for the symbols covering every square inch of fabric. Inside, 1 sleeping bag, 1 backpack, 1 Garmin Montana 650. And sitting upright in the center of the tent, facing the entrance as if waiting for him, was a small wooden box carved with the same symbol from Ethan's knife, the crowned king with the camel's head. Derek didn't touch it. Every instinct he had screamed not to touch it. His radio. "Sullivan, Reynolds here. We're about 15 minutes out. Traffic on 441 was worse than expected. Copy. I'll be here." He paused. "And guys, bring the shotguns. Something's really wrong with this scene." Define wrong. How could he define it? The way the symbols seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them? The smell that made his sinuses burn? The voice on the radio that shouldn't have been there? The feeling, and it was just a feeling, nothing concrete, nothing he could put in a report, that he was being watched by something that understood exactly how much he needed that overtime pay. "Just bring them," Derek said. He backed away from the tent and did a complete 360 sweep of the area. His streamlight caught something reflective about 30 yards into the tree line. Eyes low to the ground, unblinking. Raccoon, probably. Or a fox. Except raccoons and foxes moved when you pointed lights at them, and these eyes stayed perfectly still. Derek counted. 2 eyes became 4. 4 became 8. All at the same height, all reflecting his light with that distinctive green eyeshine of the tapetum lucidum. All absolutely motionless. "This is Derek Sullivan, park ranger," he called out, voice steady despite the cold weight settling into his gut. "You are in a closed section of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Identify yourself or disperse immediately." The eyes blinked in unison. Then as one, they vanished. Not retreated. Vanished. The reflected light simply stopped, as if whatever had been there had ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Derek's thumb found his radio. "Reynolds, Martinez, how far out are you?" Static. Then Martinez's voice, unusually tight. "We've got a problem. There's a tree down across Newfound Gap Road. We're trying to find a way around, but..." The transmission cut off. Derek tried to raise them 3 more times, but got only that same warbling static, the kind of interference that shouldn't happen with digital radios on a clear night. He was alone. 40 minutes from backup, minimum. Maybe longer if they had to clear the road. The wind died completely. In the sudden silence, Derek heard singing. It came from deeper in the forest, multiple voices chanting in a language he didn't recognize. Not Latin this time. Something older, consonants clicking and vowels drawn out in patterns that made his teeth ache. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the mountains themselves had found voice. Derek made a decision. He photographed everything with his iPhone 4S, the tent, the symbols, the book, the candles. He took close-ups of the text, making sure to get clear shots of the English notations. Then he grabbed the leather book, wrapping it in an evidence bag from his pack, and started back toward his truck at a pace just shy of running. The singing followed him. Or maybe he was moving toward it. In the darkness, with his streamlight creating a narrow tunnel of visibility, it was impossible to tell. The trail markers he'd followed on the way in were gone, replaced by trees he didn't remember passing. His Garmin GPS map 64 showed his position, but the topographic map seemed wrong, contour lines flowing in directions that didn't match his memory of this sector. Then he saw the figures. They stood in a clearing he absolutely knew hadn't been there 15 minutes ago. 9 people in dark robes arranged in a triangle with 3 at each point. In the center of the triangle, 3 circles had been drawn in what looked like salt, each one containing a black candle that burned with flames too still for the wind that had suddenly returned. And standing in the middle circle, facing Derek with a smile that made his bladder want to let go, was Ethan Lawson. Except it wasn't really Ethan. The face was right, the body was right, but something fundamental had changed in the way the man held himself. He stood too straight, spine rigid in a way that suggested bones arranged incorrectly beneath the skin. His eyes caught the firelight and reflected it back gold instead of the normal red of human eyeshine. "Derek Sullivan," the thing wearing Ethan said, "you have something that belongs to us." The 9 robed figures turned as one to look at him. Derek's hand went to his weapon, but his arm felt heavy, muscles sluggish as if moving through water. The evidence bag containing the book seemed to pulse against his chest where he'd stuffed it under his jacket. "I'm a federal law enforcement ranger," Derek said, surprised his voice worked at all. "You're all under arrest for..." "For what?" Ethan Thing tilted its head at an angle necks don't bend. "For worship? For seeking knowledge? For trying to call down from the heights what your species has feared since it first learned to light fires in the dark?" One of the robed figures spoke, voice female and somehow familiar. "He has the grimoire. The third prince will not manifest without all components present." Derek's training kicked in. Identify threats, establish control, call for backup. But his radio was dead. His weapon felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and 9 against 1 were terrible odds even before whatever was happening to Ethan got factored in. "Let me tell you a story," Ethan Thing said, taking a step forward. The salt circle didn't break. It simply ceased to exist where his foot fell, reforming behind him. 3 days ago, a young man named Ethan Lawson came to these mountains seeking solitude. He was tired of his life, you see. Tired of debt and disappointment and the grinding mediocrity of human existence. He'd read certain books, learned certain names, and he made a deal. Another step. Derek's finger found his Glock's trigger but couldn't squeeze. He offered himself as a vessel in exchange for knowledge. We offered him to a prince who teaches all sciences and secret things, who can make men knowing in all arts. A fair trade, don't you think? One mediocre human life for the wisdom of ages. "That's not how it works," one of the robed figures said, pulling back her hood. Derek's stomach dropped. Linda Chen stared back at him, face calm, eyes reflecting that same golden light. The grimoire must be present. The sacrifice must speak the name willingly. All components must align, or the prince returns to the western quarters and we gain nothing. Then we're at an impasse, Ethan Thing said. Because Ranger Sullivan has the grimoire and I suspect he won't give it up willingly. Derek forced his arm to move, raised his weapon with agonizing slowness. All of you, on the ground. Now. Linda laughed. It wasn't her laugh. Too many harmonics, too many voices speaking in unison. Derek. Sweet, desperate Derek. Do you know why we chose Ethan? Why we've been watching you for months, learning your patterns, understanding your needs? Shut up and get on the ground. We chose him because he was willing, because he came to us seeking transformation, ready to pay any price. But there are other ways to secure a vessel. She gestured at the 3 salt circles. 3 nights of the new moon. 3 offerings. 3 names spoken willingly. Ethan was the first. We need only 2 more. The wind picked up again, carrying voices that chanted in that same clicking, vowel-heavy language. The trees around the clearing bent inward, branches reaching down like fingers. You can't make me speak anything, Derek said. No, but we can make you choose. Linda's smile widened. We know about your daughters, Megan and Sarah, 8 and 6 years old. We know about the debt, the braces Megan needs, the medication Sarah requires for her asthma. We know Emily works 2 jobs and you haven't taken a vacation in 4 years. We know everything, Derek, because we've been preparing this moment since you transferred to Great Smoky Mountains. Derek's hand trembled. You're lying. Am I? Check your phone. He didn't want to. Every instinct screamed not to look, but his free hand moved anyway, pulling his iPhone from his pocket. 3 missed calls from Emily. 2 voicemails. He thumbed the speaker button. Emily's voice, tight with panic. Derek, where are you? Megan's missing. She was in the backyard 20 minutes ago and now she's gone. The police are here but they're not. Derek, please, where are you? Second voicemail 4 minutes ago. Someone left a note. It says, Derek, it says they have her. That if we want her back, you need to bring something called the Lesser Key to someplace called the Mingus Mill by midnight. Derek, what's happening? What have you gotten us into? The phone slipped from Derek's numb fingers. Mingus Mill. Historic site about 4 miles from his current position. Closed to tourists this time of year. Midnight was in 90 minutes. There it is, Linda said softly. The moment of choice. Give us the grimoire and speak the name. Willingly of your own volition and your daughter goes free. Refuse and, well, we need 3 vessels. Ethan was the first. Your daughter could be the second. The choice is entirely yours. Derek's world narrowed to a single point of clarity. The weapon in his hand, the 9 cultists arrayed before him. The thing wearing Ethan's face in the center circle. Linda Chen, his incident commander. The woman he'd worked with for 6 years, smiling with eyes that reflected inhuman gold. And somewhere 4 miles away, his 8-year-old daughter held captive by people who worshipped things with crowned heads and camel faces. You made one mistake, Derek said quietly. Oh? You told me where she is. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the unnatural silence. Linda Chen dropped, red blooming across her robe. The other cultists scattered, some running, some diving for cover behind trees. Ethan Thing shrieked. Not words, just pure rage in frequencies that made Derek's inner ears scream and lunged forward. Derek emptied the magazine. 15 rounds, center mass, the training taking over. Ethan Thing stumbled but didn't fall, golden ichor spraying instead of blood. Derek dropped the empty Glock and ran. Behind him, the forest erupted with sound. Chanting, screaming, something large crashing through undergrowth. Derek's streamlight battery died, plunging him into darkness broken only by moonlight that shouldn't exist on a new moon night. He ran anyway, trusting muscle memory and 11 years of hiking these trails. His Garmin showed Mingus Mill northwest, 3.7 miles. 90 minutes until midnight. He could make it in 45 if he didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't think about what was chasing him through the darkness. The grimoire bounced against his chest. Part of him wanted to throw it away, let them have it, anything to stop the pursuit. But he'd read enough of the English notations to understand. The book was the key. Without it, they couldn't complete the ritual. Without it, Megan was just a hostage, not a sacrifice. He burst out of the forest onto a gravel road. His truck was a quarter-mile south, but Mingus Mill was north. No time to debate. Derek turned north and kept running. The thing that had been Ethan caught up to him at the Cherokee Orchard Road junction. It moved with impossible speed, covering ground in leaps that defied physics. Derek saw it coming, a silhouette against stars that shouldn't be visible, and dove into the roadside ditch. Claws raked the air where his head had been. Derek rolled, came up with his backup weapon, a Ruger LCP, .380 that wouldn't do shit against whatever this was, and fired anyway. The muzzle flash illuminated Ethan's face for one frozen instant. Skin split open to reveal bone underneath, jaw unhinged to show rows of teeth that spiraled back into impossible depths, eyes replaced with golden fire. The thing screamed and retreated. Not wounded. Derek could tell it wasn't wounded, but recoiling from something else. Light? Sound? He didn't know and didn't care. He ran. Mingus Mill appeared around the next bend. A 3-story wooden structure built in 1886. Water wheel frozen in time. Tourist signs explaining the historical grinding process. And parked in front, a black SUV with its engine running and headlights off. Derek approached at an angle, using the tree line for cover. Through the mill's windows, he could see candlelight. 3 figures. 2 adults in robes, 1 small silhouette that made his heart try to exit through his throat. Megan sitting on the floor, hands bound. He had 7 rounds in the Ruger, 2 cultists, daughter in crossfire range. Every tactical consideration said this was suicide. Derek checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes. He thought about Emily's face when he'd told her about the ranger position. The excitement in her eyes, the belief that federal employment meant stability, meant security, meant he could provide for their growing family. 11 years of watching that excitement fade into quiet disappointment, of seeing her take on extra shifts while he volunteered for overtime that barely covered the gap between income and expenses. He thought about Megan's smile when he'd promised to make her soccer game, and the way it had crumbled when he'd called to cancel again. He thought about the symbols in the grimoire, the notation that said, "Sacrifice must be willing." Derek pulled the evidence bag from under his jacket. Inside, the leather-bound book seemed to pulse with warmth. He could feel it trying to communicate something, knowledge pressing against his consciousness like fingers probing a wound. All sciences and secret things, wisdom of ages, everything he needed to fix his broken financial life, solve his family's problems, become something more than a $43,000 a year ranger drowning in debt. All he had to do was speak a name. Willingly. Of his own volition. "No," Derek whispered. He walked toward the mill's entrance, weapon holstered, hands raised. The door opened before he could knock. A robed figure gestured him inside. Man's hands, wedding ring visible. Someone's husband doing this in the name of knowledge or power, or whatever lies they'd been sold. The interior smelled like sulfur and sage. 3 salt circles on the floor, 3 black candles, symbols drawn in blood that matched the ones from Ethan's tent. Megan sat in the center circle, tears streaming down her face, mouth gagged. "Daddy," she tried to say through the cloth. The second cultist pulled back her hood. Not Linda Chen. She was dead or dying in the forest. But another woman Derek recognized from the park's administrative staff. Carol something. Always pleasant at the office, brought cookies to the Christmas party. "You brought it," Carol said. "Good. We weren't sure you'd understand." Let her go. All in time. First, the ritual. The grimoire must be present. You've provided that. The sacrifice must speak the name and you will to save your daughter. The 3rd night of the moon's darkness, which is now as midnight approaches. All components align. Derek looked at his daughter, 8 years old, terrified, trusting him to fix this because daddies fix things. Daddies make everything okay, that's what daddies do. What happens after I speak the name? The prince manifests. He answers 3 questions, grants 3 boons to those who summoned him. Then he returns to the western quarters. Simple transaction, really. And Megan goes free. We have no use for her beyond leverage. You're the sacrifice, Derek. You're the one who speaks willingly. You're the vessel. There it was. The truth beneath the lies. Speak the name and something wearing a crown with a camel's head would wear Derek's face instead. Ethan hadn't been freed after his possession. That thing in the forest was Ethan, transformed by knowledge into something that used to be human. Derek could feel the grimoire calling to him, could feel its promises, wisdom, power, understanding. Just speak the name, just say it willingly, just open yourself to what waits in the western quarters. He looked at Megan. She'd stopped crying, was watching him with her mother's eyes, smart, evaluating, already understanding that adults made choices and some of those choices meant nobody got what they wanted. Derek made his choice. He threw the grimoire into the nearest candle. Leather and parchment dry as bone caught instantly. The book screamed, literally screamed, voices of 100 previous victims crying out as flames consumed centuries of occult knowledge. Carol shrieked and lunged for it. Derek shot her in the leg. She went down. The other cultist ran. Derek crossed to Megan in 3 strides, scooped her up, and headed for the door. Behind them, the grimoire burned. The symbols drawn in blood began to smoke. The salt circles cracked and scattered. And from somewhere beyond the veil of reality, something vast and crowned and hungry roared its frustration. Derek didn't stop running until they reached his truck, Megan clutching his neck, both of them sobbing. He keyed his radio. Miraculously, reception had returned and called in everything. Officer-involved shooting, kidnapping, multiple suspects. Request all available units. The response came fast. Sirens, flashing lights, cops and rangers flooding the area. Derek gave his statement 3 times, voice hoarse, Megan silent beside him wrapped in a shock blanket. They found Linda Chen dead at the ritual site. Found Ethan's body, just Ethan now, empty and cold, in the center circle. Found Carol bleeding but alive, already lawyering up, refusing to say anything except, "We were so close." They never found the other 7 cultists. Never found evidence of who they were, though Derek provided names he remembered from office Christmas parties and safety briefings. Never found the grimoire, just ashes that crumbled to dust when forensics tried to collect them. The official report called it a cult activity gone wrong, drug-fueled delusion, shared psychosis. The symbols were dismissed as random markings, the Latin text as gibberish from someone who'd watched too many horror movies. Ethan Lawson had killed himself while high on hallucinogens. Linda Chen had been murdered by person or persons unknown. Derek Sullivan had saved his daughter from kidnappers and would receive a commendation. Derek retired from the Park Service 4 weeks later, used his remaining sick leave, filed for early retirement on psychological grounds, took a job as a security consultant for $28,000 a year, with worse benefits and no pension. Emily didn't understand. Couldn't understand. How could he explain that some prices were too high? That some knowledge shouldn't be sought? That there were things with crowns and camel heads waiting in western quarters for desperate men to speak their names willingly? Megan never talked about that night. The therapist said it was normal, that children processed trauma differently. But sometimes Derek caught her staring at shadows in ways that reminded him of those golden eyes in the forest. Sometimes she drew pictures, triangles with circles at the points, symbols that made his stomach clench. Sometimes late at night when Emily was asleep and the house was quiet, Derek heard singing in a language of clicks and drawn-out vowels. He knew it was just tinnitus, just stress, just his mind playing tricks. Had to be. Because the alternative, that the ritual had failed but not aborted, that speaking part of the invocation had opened a door that never fully closed, that something patient and crowned was still waiting for him to finish what he'd started, was too terrible to consider. Derek's daughters still needed braces. Emily still worked 2 jobs. The bills still came due, and in the mountains of Great Smoky, in a clearing that no GPS could find, 3 salt circles remained drawn in the earth, waiting for the next desperate soul to stumble across them, waiting for someone willing. Olympic National Forest, Washington, March 2017. Austin Parker's phone buzzed with the 3rd overdue notice in as many days as he pulled into the Hoh Rainforest Ranger Station. Medical billing department, persistent as wolves. He silenced it without reading the amount, knowing the number wouldn't make paying it any easier. His daughter Mia's last round of treatments had cost more than he made in 4 months, and the insurance company had found creative ways to deny half the claims. The overtime authorization sitting on his supervisor's desk represented 3 weeks of extended search and rescue operations at time and a half. Austin needed that money the way drowning men needed air. "You sure about this?" Linda Chen asked, sliding the paperwork across her desk. She'd been the Olympic National Forest SAR coordinator for 12 years, long enough to recognize desperation when she saw it. "It's equinox week. Weather's going to be hell, and this case already feels wrong." Austin signed without hesitation. "I need the hours." Linda's expression softened with understanding she didn't voice. Everyone at the station knew about Mia, about the leukemia that had turned Austin's life into a tightrope walk between paychecks and bankruptcy. Shane Matthews, 28, solo hiker, didn't return from the Hoh River Trail. His girlfriend reported him missing yesterday when he missed their dinner reservation in Port Angeles. "Timeline?" Austin asked, professional mode engaging despite the exhaustion that lived in his bones now. Last confirmed sighting was 4 days ago at the Lewis Meadow trailhead. Permit showed he planned a 3-day loop. Linda hesitated, her fingers drumming against the desk in a nervous pattern. "Austin, there's something you should know about the location. I've hiked every mile of this forest. What am I missing?" Linda pulled up a digital map. 7 red markers clustered around the same 10-mile radius. 7 disappearances in the past 7 years, all during the week of the spring equinox. All solo hikers, all eventually found, all... She trailed off, jaw tightening. All what? All drowned, in locations with no water source within 2 miles. The words hung in the air like smoke. Austin studied the map, his mind cataloging the impossibility. The marked locations were ridgelines, high meadows, dense forest well above any watershed. Equipment failure, flash flooding. Coroner ruled drowning in every case. Lungs full of fresh water. Lake water specifically. Algae content matched Lake Crescent. But Lake Crescent is 15 miles from the nearest body. Linda met his eyes. And every victim was found wearing a crown of deer antlers. Fresh antlers, still bloody at the base where they'd been severed from the skull. Austin's phone buzzed again. Another message from the hospital billing department, probably. The overtime rate calculation ran through his head automatically. 3 weeks at extended hours would cover Mia's next 2 treatments. Maybe 3 if he was careful. He looked back at the map, at those 7 red markers like drops of blood on green terrain. "I'll find him," Austin said, standing. "What's the search grid?" Linda's hand caught his arm as he turned to leave. The local tribes have stories about this area, specifically about the equinoxes. They don't hike here during the transition periods. Superstitions won't help me find Matthews. Maybe not. But the Quileute and Meka both have oral histories about something in the deep forest, something that wakes when the seasons turn. Linda released his arm, resignation crossing her face. "Be careful out there. And Austin, if something feels wrong, abort. No amount of overtime is worth..." "I'll be careful," Austin interrupted because he couldn't afford to hear the rest of that sentence. The Hoh Rainforest in March was a study in green chaos. Moss covering everything, hanging from branches in thick curtains, blanketing fallen logs in emerald shrouds. The air sat heavy with moisture, every breath tasting of decomposition and growth occurring simultaneously. Austin had hiked these trails hundreds of times, but today the forest felt different, expectant somehow, like the trees were waiting for something. He found Shane Matthews' campsite 6 hours into the search, tucked into a small clearing a 1/4 mile off the main trail. The tent was still standing, properly secured, no signs of disturbance. But Matthews's gear told a different story. His pack had been emptied, contents arranged in a careful circle around the fire pit. Not scattered, arranged. Sleeping bag, cooking equipment, personal items, all placed with geometric precision, and in the center, driven into the soft earth like a grave marker, a branch crowned with fresh deer antlers. Austin's radio crackled. "Parker, you copy? Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. You need to be back at base camp before nightfall." He keyed the transmit button, eyes still fixed on the antlers. "Copy. I've located Matthew's campsite. No sign of the subject, but evidence of occupancy within the last 72 hours. Requesting additional search time." Static, then Linda's voice, tight with something that might have been fear. "Negative, Parker. Extraction protocol is in effect. There's a storm system moving in that..." The radio cut out. Austin adjusted the frequency, tried again. Dead. He checked his Garmin GPS map 64, still functioning, coordinates locked. Signal strength showed adequate coverage. The radio simply refused to transmit. He photographed the campsite methodically, documenting everything for the official report. The arrangement bothered him more than random scatter would have. This showed intention, ritual, and the antlers. He knelt beside them, examining the severed base. Fresh, cut within the last day, maybe two. The bone showed clean saw marks, deliberate removal, a sound behind him. Austin spun, hand dropping to his knife. Nothing. Just forest and moss and that oppressive green silence. But the sound came again from a different direction. Rhythmic. Wet, like someone breathing through water-filled lungs. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Impossible, there was no cell service this deep in the forest. Austin pulled it out, saw Mia's name on the screen. He answered without thinking. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then, faintly, so faintly he almost convinced himself he imagined it, his daughter's voice. "Daddy, I'm drowning." The line went dead. Austin's hands shook as he checked the call log. No record, no signal bars. The phone shouldn't have rung at all. He was breathing too fast, hyperventilating, his rational mind scrambling to categorize and explain, while something deeper recognized the wrongness bleeding through reality's edges. Focus. He had a job to do, a missing hiker to find, overtime hours that would pay for Mia's treatment. Austin forced himself to think tactically, scanning the campsite for signs of Matthew's direction of travel. There, broken branches leading northeast toward the higher elevations. He marked the location on his GPS and followed. The forest grew darker as he climbed, though it was barely past noon. The canopy thickened overhead, moss hanging in dense curtains that filtered what little light penetrated. Austin noticed other things too. Trees growing in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. 7 old-growth Sitka spruce arranged in a rough circle, their trunks carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Fresh carvings, sap still weeping from the cuts. And voices. Faint, distant speaking words in a language that sounded like Latin, but older, rougher. Chanting, rhythmic and patient as a heartbeat. Austin's tactical training from his brief stint in the National Guard kicked in. He moved quietly now, following the sound. The terrain opened into a natural amphitheater, a bowl-shaped depression surrounded by ancient trees. And in the center, he found Shane Matthews. The body was posed. That was Austin's first coherent thought, seeing Matthews seated against a massive cedar, arms spread wide, head tilted back. The second thought, following immediately, the antlers. They weren't placed on Matthews's head like a crown. They'd grown from it, erupting through skull and scalp in branching points that dripped blood and clear fluid. Fresh growth, impossible growth, bone extending where bone had no business existing. Austin stumbled backward, gorge rising. He'd seen death before. Traffic accidents, drowning victims recovered from Lake Crescent, one memorable suicide by shotgun. But this was different. This was wrong in a way that violated fundamental rules about how bodies worked. Matthews's chest moved. A breath, shallow and wet, pulling air through lungs that should have been still. Austin's medic training overrode his horror. He rushed forward, fingers finding a pulse. Weak, irregular, but present. "Matthews, Shane, can you hear me?" The eyes opened, milky white, no iris visible, staring past Austin at something only they could see. Matthews's mouth opened, and water poured out. Not a trickle, a stream, impossibly voluminous, gushing from his throat like a broken hydrant. Lake water, Austin's shocked brain noted, seeing the green tinge of algae, smelling the mineral freshness of deep cold water. "He breathes for Chernunos now," a voice said behind Austin. He spun, knife in hand, to find a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. Late 50s, dressed in hiking gear that looked expensive and well-used. Her face was calm, almost serene, marked with symbols painted in what Austin desperately hoped was mud. "Step away from the vessel," she continued, her tone conversational. "The transformation is nearly complete. 7 years, 7 sacrifices, 7 doors between the world that is and the world that was. Shane is the 7th, the last key in the lock." Austin's mind raced, cataloging details. The woman's hands were clean despite the forest dirt. No, not clean. Stained with something darker around the fingernails. Her hiking boots showed no mud despite the wet terrain. And behind her, emerging from the trees, others. 6 of them, dressed similarly, all bearing the same painted symbols. "You're the ones who did this," Austin said, keeping his voice steady with effort. "The 7 disappearances, 7 murders, sacrifices," the woman corrected gently. "And not murders, transformations. Each one willingly gave themselves to the horned god. Each one opened a door. Shane opened the last." She smiled, beatific and terrible. "You're welcome to witness the birth, Austin Parker. We know about your daughter, about her sickness. Chernunos is a god of death and life both, the eternal cycle. He could heal her. All we ask is faith." The words hit like a physical blow. Austin's hand tightened on his knife, rage and fear warring with a desperate, traitorous hope. "You're insane. We're devoted. There's a difference." The woman, clearly the leader, stepped closer. "The old gods never died, Austin. They sleep. They wait. And when the faithful call loudly enough, when the sacrifices are sufficient, they wake. Chernunos has been sleeping for 2,000 years. Since the Romans cut down his sacred groves, since Christianity drove his followers into hiding, but we remember. We preserve. We resurrect." Behind her, the other cultists began to chant. The same Latin-adjacent language Austin had heard earlier, words that seemed to pull at something deep in his hindbrain. And Shane Matthews, God, the man was still alive, still breathing that impossible water, began to change further. His skin took on a greenish cast, like moss growing beneath the surface. The antlers pushed higher, branching into a full rack that would have taken a deer decades to grow. Austin's phone buzzed. He glanced down instinctively. Another message from Mia's number, though that was impossible. This time it was a photo. His daughter in her hospital bed, smiling at the camera, holding up a drawing she'd made. The timestamp showed 3 minutes ago. "Service is impossible here," the woman said, reading his expression. "Unless something divine intervenes. Chernunos reaches across the barriers now, showing you what could be. Your daughter, healed. Your debts, gone. All the suffering erased. All we ask is that you witness, believe. Join us in welcoming the God." The rational part of Austin's mind screamed that this was manipulation, psychological warfare, cult indoctrination tactics straight from the handbook. But another part, the part that had watched Mia's hair fall out in clumps, that had held her hand through procedures that left her screaming, that checked his bank account every morning with mounting dread, that part whispered, "What if?" Matthews convulsed. More water poured from his mouth, his nose, even his eyes, streaming as if his entire body had become a vessel for something vast and liquid. The ground beneath him darkened, saturating with water that had no source, pooling and spreading. Austin watched in horror as the pool deepened, becoming a pond, impossible volume emerging from Matthew's transforming flesh. And in the water, something moved, large, antlered, rising. "The drowned god comes," the woman whispered, reverent. "Lord of the hunt, master of death and rebirth, Cernunnos of the deep forest. 7 years we have prepared, 7 sacrifices we have offered, 7 doors we have opened. Now the threshold breaks, and he enters the world once more." The thing rising from the water was enormous, easily 9 feet tall, its body a fusion of human musculature and something older, more primal. The head was fully stag, massive antlers spreading like crown and weapon both. Its eyes glowed with bioluminescence, the green-blue of deep lake water where light had never reached. And when it opened its mouth, more water poured out, flooding the clearing, rising around Austin's ankles with impossible speed. He ran. Pure survival instinct overrode everything. The overtime pay, the medical bills, even the cultists' promises. Austin crashed through the underbrush, heading downslope, away from the clearing and the thing that violated every law of nature. Behind him, the chanting rose to a crescendo, and the sound of water grew louder, not flowing but surging, a tide that had no business existing in a landlocked forest. The water caught him halfway down the ridge. Impossibly, it flowed uphill, defying gravity, a wave that slammed into Austin's legs and swept him off his feet. He went under, his scream cut off as lake-cold water filled his mouth, his nose, trying to force its way into his lungs. He fought to the surface, gasping, and saw the forest transformed. Water everywhere. The clearing, the trees, the entire ridge system flooded as if a dam had broken. Except there was no dam, no reservoir, just water manifesting from nothing, and walking through it, striding with impossible grace the drowned god, Cernunnos. Every step it took, vegetation burst into sudden growth, moss spreading, ferns unfurling, trees sprouting from nothing. Life and death in equal measure, the eternal cycle made flesh. Austin grabbed a low-hanging branch, pulled himself up, coughing water from his lungs. He had to get out, had to warn someone, had to... His phone was ringing, soaked, damaged, it shouldn't work. But Mia's name flashed on the cracked screen. Austin answered with shaking hands. "Daddy?" Her voice clear and bright, not the thin, pained whisper of the last few months. Strong, healthy. "Daddy, I feel better. The doctors say it's a miracle. The cancer's gone. It's just... gone." Austin's breath caught. "Mia, baby, what?" "A man came to see me. He had antlers, like a deer. He touched my head and said, 'The father witnessed, so the daughter heals.' Daddy, I'm not sick anymore." The phone went dead. Austin stared at it, mind fragmenting. Impossible. All of this was impossible. But he could hear Mia's joy in those words, the first genuine happiness he'd heard from her in 8 months of treatments and procedures and pain. The cultist leader appeared beside him, somehow dry despite the flood. "Cernunnos keeps his promises, Austin. Your daughter lives. The debt you carried is lifted. All we ask in return is silence. Let us complete our work. Let the god walk this forest as he did in ancient days." "And Shane Matthews?" Austin forced out. "The other 6? Transformed, elevated. They became doorways so that divinity could return. Would you call that murder? Or would you call it the highest purpose a human can achieve?" Austin looked back toward the clearing. The water was receding now, draining into the earth as impossibly as it had appeared, and where it touched, life exploded. Flowers blooming out of season, saplings shooting up with time-lapse speed, the forest renewing itself in moments rather than years. "You have a choice," the woman said softly. "Report what you saw. Try to explain the inexplicable and watch as doctors puzzle over your daughter's spontaneous remission. Or accept the gift you've been given. Witness what you've witnessed, and walk away." She was offering him everything he needed. Mia's health, An end to the financial nightmare. All he had to do was stay silent about 7 murders, no, 7 sacrifices. 7 people who'd apparently gone willingly to their transformation. Who was he to judge their choice? But Austin thought of Shane Matthews' milky eyes, of the water pouring endlessly from his throat, of the antlers erupting through his skull. Thought of 6 others who died the same way, their bodies found drowned in impossible locations, crowned with bone that shouldn't exist. His daughter's laughter echoed in his memory. Real laughter, not the weak, pained sounds of recent months, the laughter of a healthy child. "I need to see her," Austin said finally. "I need to confirm she's okay." "Of course," the woman smiled. "We'll escort you out. The search for Shane Matthews will conclude tomorrow. His body will be found at the base of a cliff, an unfortunate hiking accident. Tragic. But these things happen in the wilderness." Austin let them lead him down the mountain, through a forest that seemed to pulse with new vitality. The water had vanished completely, leaving no trace except impossibly healthy vegetation. His radio crackled back to life as they neared the trailhead, Linda's voice breaking through with relief. "Parker! Thank God. We lost your signal for 3 hours. Did you find Matthews?" Austin looked back at the cultist leader. She nodded, permission and warning in equal measure. "Negative," Austin said into the radio, the lie tasting like lake water on his tongue. "No sign of the subject. Requesting return to base camp." "Copy that. See you at the station." They parted ways at the parking lot, the cultists disappearing into vehicles that looked like any other hiker's cars. The leader paused before leaving, handed Austin a card with nothing on it but a symbol, the same one carved into the trees. Antlers forming a crown, ancient and patient. "If you speak of this, the gift reverses," she said simply. "Cernunnos gives, but he also takes, remember that." Austin drove to Seattle in a fugue state, his mind refusing to process what he'd witnessed. The hospital was visiting hours when he arrived, and he found Mia's room by muscle memory. She was sitting up in bed, actually sitting up, not propped weakly against pillows, coloring in a book, while her mother dozed in the chair beside her. "Daddy!" Mia's face lit up and she launched herself at him with energy he hadn't seen in months. "Did you meet him? The deer man? He said you sent him." Austin caught her, felt her solid weight, her strength, the warmth of her body no longer burning with fever. Over her shoulder he saw the doctor's notes on the chart. Complete remission. No explanation. Spontaneous recovery. His wife woke, tears streaming down her face. "Austin, I don't understand. This morning she was barely responsive and then... It's a miracle, that's what the doctors keep saying, a miracle." Austin held his daughter and his wife and felt the weight of 7 deaths pressing against his chest like stones. Shane Matthews was still out there, transforming into something inhuman. 6 others before him had undergone the same horror. And somewhere in the Olympic National Forest, a god walked that shouldn't exist. But Mia was alive, laughing, whole. Austin Parker made his choice in that hospital room, holding his healed daughter. He would file his report. State that Shane Matthews wasn't located during the authorized search period. Let the official recovery happen tomorrow, the body staged as a hiking accident. He would accept the overtime pay that would arrive in his account. And he would never, ever return to the Hoh rainforest during the equinox weeks. Some prices, he realized, you paid not in money but in knowledge, in silence, in complicity. Mia pulled back, grinning up at him with clear eyes. "The deer man said you're brave, Daddy. He said brave people make hard choices." "Yeah, baby," Austin whispered, his voice breaking. "They do." That night, alone in the hospital parking lot while his wife and daughter slept peacefully upstairs, Austin Parker cried for the first time since Mia's diagnosis. Not from relief, though he felt that. Not from joy, though that was there too. But from the terrible understanding that he'd witnessed something ancient and vast and wrong, and he'd chosen to protect it, chosen to let it walk free in the world. Because the alternative was losing his daughter. And what father wouldn't trade 7 strangers, 7 willing sacrifices, the cultist had called them, for his own child's life? Austin looked at the card in his hand, the antlered crown symbol stark against the white background. Tomorrow, he would burn it. Next week, he would try to convince himself it had all been stress-induced hallucination. Eventually, maybe, he'd believe that. But on every spring equinox for the rest of his life, he would remember the drowned god rising from impossible water. Would remember Shane Matthews's milky eyes and the antlers growing from his skull. Would remember the choice he'd made and the price 7 people had paid so his daughter could live. The gift was given. The silence was bought. And somewhere in the deep forest, Chernunos walked beneath the moss-draped trees, waiting for the wheel to turn again. Austin Parker drove home to his healed daughter and his impossible miracle, carrying the weight of witness like a crown of thorns. He'd survived the Olympic National Forest. But survival, he'd learned, wasn't the same as escape. Some places marked you. Some gods demanded payment. And some choices, once made, followed you forever.